All right, welcome everyone. This is another Truth Talks. I am your host, Ed Genesis. Truth Talks is with TRHT Kalamazoo, which is Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Kalamazoo. I think I just say it too many times because I just stumbled. But anyway, today we're doing part 2 on gun violence. We just kind of we knew we had to do a part 2 a while ago, but Emily and I discussed having a necessary part 2 right now, as there has been an influx of gun violence in the community, and whenever that is, there's always ripples that go through the community. So we have an amazing panel today that we're going to dive in, go deep, and have some real conversation, some truth talk about gun violence. And before they introduce themselves, I will go over the touchstones, which is just a way that we ground ourselves with TRHT. Again, Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Kalamazoo is like an agreement, a respectful way that we come together and have a conversation. So with no further ado, I will go through the touchstones, and then one by one, you all can introduce yourselves and we can get going. So the touchstones. Please forgive me. Be 100% present, extending and presuming welcome. Speak your truth. Identify assumptions and suspend judgment. Respect and learn from silence. Maintain confidentiality. No language of the soul is privilege over any other. No language of the soul is privilege over any other language of the soul. Value feeling as much as knowing. No fixing, no saving, no advising. Trust the healing process, your own heart and the hearts of others. Listen deeply. When things get difficult, turn to wonder. Always by invitation. Those are the touchstones. With that, I would like to introduce the panelists today. I would be wrong if I did not start with my wife, the Vice Mayor of the City of Kalamazoo, Mrs. Patrice Griffin. After you introduce yourself, please, if you can popcorn it over to the next panelist. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here with you all today. My name is Patrice Griffin. I am a lifelong resident of the city of Kalamazoo. I'm currently serving as a vice mayor of the city, and I also serve in many capacities. I'm just really happy to be here today and talk about this very important topic. And do you want me to popcorn it, pass it to someone, or are we popcorning it out?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I said popcorn, but pass it over. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's my fault then. So I'll pass it over to Gabby.
Thanks, Patrice. I'm Gabby Dela Cruz. I'm the Black and Brown Therapy Collective coordinator here in Kalamazoo. The collective is fairly new. I work to connect non-white residents with non-white therapists because it just seems like healing can happen a little bit faster if people have a similar or like a shared life experience. So like I mentioned, the collective has existed for about 6 months now, and I think we're really gaining some traction, so I'm happy to be here with everybody. I'll pass it over to Michael. You're muted.
Can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear me now? Okay. I'm Michael Wilder, Group Violence Intervention Coordinator for the City of Kalamazoo, partner with Urban Alliance, and I'm happy to be here today. Oh, I'll turn it over to Chief Boyce.
You're on mute.
I'm on mute?
No, sorry. I thought I hit it, so sorry about that. Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for having me. I'm David Boyson, Deputy Chief at Public Safety. Been here for 26 years, filling in for Chief Coakley, who was at another event tonight. Couldn't be two places at once. So, but I'm happy to be here and talk about this really, really important topic. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Again, my name is Ed Genesis. I am the host. I'm also a racial healing practitioner, criminal justice reform organizer, direct, formerly incarcerated, direct impacted, and also once was a perpetrator carrying a gun. And my father was also killed by a gun. And so there's the two sides. I wanted to lift that up because going into this conversation, you all have the agenda, but as usual, I'm gonna go left. We will go over the agenda, but the first thing that I want to lift up is coming from Gary, Indiana, which is where I was born and raised. We literally sought out Kalamazoo as a better place. And in the early 90s, it wasn't like how it is now. And I know a lot of people always say, you know, especially the older you get, like, well, it wasn't like that in my day. Like, literally, it was not like how it is today. There's been a drastic change in how many shootings, the boldness in the shootings, the just right there, the boldness, the broad daylight, people's houses. It's a problem. And that's why we're having a part two. And I was very, very, very specific in inviting who to invite today. Very, very specific in who to invite today. And I want to lift up Miss Melody Coleman, could not make it, who lost her grandson. Vice Chair County Commissioner Tammy Ray had a scheduling conflict. And just to, so Deputy Chief Dave Boysen said that he's filling in for Chief Coakley. But I want you to know, sir, KDPS was invited as a whole. Whoever is, that's the powerful part, because we all have to have this conversation. So we have KDPS, we have GVI, we have the city of Kalamazoo, we also have healing. So Gabby and Emily and I talked and was like, hey, we have to have that part, because Emily, I have to lift up Emily Oliveras, who's behind the doing the tech and always support. We check in weekly about not only the discussions for Truth Talks, but the panelists. But Emily also checks in. I don't, check in is a wrong word. Emily also checks on me as a person, as a human being. And being that I live on the north side, we've had conversations about, hey, do you know anybody who may need, you know, healing services as far as the Black and Brown Therapy Collective and things like that. So just really being real community. And shouts out to Francis as well, who works for TRutH and again checks in, checks on me, and checks on community. So with that, let's dive into, it's all of our community. We hear about the shootings. We that first initial feeling of, like I said, once upon a time wasn't like this. And even if it was, let's just say, okay, they've been shooting since the 90s. How do you feel when family is from out of town, or we all have our respective jobs? But what about when you're just chilling on the weekend and you get these calls, or somebody's from out of town, or somebody wants to move here? What is that feeling that you feel when these type of tragedies happen away from our work? And I want to throw that too. I'm gonna just dive straight into Deputy Chief Dave Boysen on that one.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, and that's why I'm glad that we have the collective, Black and Brown collective represented here, because we talk about trauma, right? So we have trauma. If you live in the neighborhoods, you're in Kalamazoo, you drive through the community, you hear what's going on, but unless you see it firsthand and you're in the neighborhoods, it's hard to even fathom the amount of trauma that the community goes through on each shooting. And it's and trauma is also, um, the first responders, the officers, to these things. And like Ed said, the frequency is much more now. We used to have on, maybe 20, which is still a lot, but we used to have about 20 non-fatal shootings a year, 5 homicides maybe. Well, we've already reached those numbers. We're at 30 non-fatal shootings. Oh, I'm getting feedback. We're at 30 non-fatal shootings and 5 homicides, 6 gun homicides total. One was accidental, but that's a lot of trauma, right? And these are family members and relatives and eyewitnesses and first responders. And it's like we all know it's unacceptable. And we've been saying, for years, there should be the outrage. We should all get together and say, well, we don't accept this in Kalamazoo. We're not going to, I don't care what's going on around the country. It should not happen here. It shouldn't happen anywhere, but we can do something about Kalamazoo. And what we say at Public Safety, and we always say, it can't be just us. It's got to be the community working together with us. And that's what's powerful about these groups, about GVI, about other community groups that are working behind the scenes and together with us to address this. But yeah, it's been a tough summer already. I would just say, just numbers wise, the month of May was a really, really bad month. We had 9 non-fatal shootings and 3 homicides in the month of May. Now we've been working hard, and I know their outreach team, Michael's going to get into that, and our community members have been working hard because I think we may have reached a tipping point at the end of May where people said, hey, we're tired of this. Enough's enough. We had the 200-man march that Northside Ministerial Alliance put together. We've got other community events that are picking up steam. And so far in the month of June, we've had 2 non-fatal shootings. Again, hopefully that's a good trend to show that we're getting ahead of this. But it's been a tough year. Last year we had a record number of non-fatal shootings. We had 75 non-fatal shootings last year in a town the size of Kalamazoo. That's completely unacceptable, with 13 gun homicides last year. So again, it's been a tough year and a half, and we're hoping that these type of initiatives can start to turn that corner and start to see some light at the end of the tunnel here.
I appreciate that. I definitely wanted to start with KDPS because typically in communities, when there is gun violence, that's what people think of. Where's the police? And I appreciate that you lifted up that it takes more than just that. I'm gonna bounce the same question over to Vice Mayor. Being the Vice Mayor of a city, the pride that comes with that, I can only imagine the heaviness of what comes with the other side when there is that influx of gun violence. Yeah, care to speak on that?
Yeah, so I resonate with a lot of what you said. And being that I've lived here my whole life, I've seen the changes, so to speak. And even if I don't know personally, people who are affected, Kalamazoo is just small enough for somebody to know somebody to know somebody. And it doesn't have to be my child for me to understand and to feel. So that's first and foremost. But you talked about boldness, the boldness of what's happening. But I think it's also notable to talk about the boldness of us as a community to have allowed some of the things that lead up to these outcomes to take place. Like, that's pretty bold in and of itself. and taking something that I learned from you, right? If I'm cussing, if I'm using, bold words to describe something and that outrages you more than what it took for me to feel that way, then we have an imbalance. And what also comes to my mind is there are people who absolutely boots on the ground for years who have done a lot of work, oftentimes underfunded and under resourced. So it's definitely want to shout out everybody who's been doing that work. And I definitely appreciate the gathering together that does take place when things happen. But again, it makes me think about if we gathered like that when things are being under resourced, if we gathered like that when our communities aren't getting the funding that they need for certain things, if we gathered like that, then like how families were gathered for funerals would gather after the fact, if we did that ahead of time, quite possibly we might be able to do some shifting in what we're seeing in our community. So thank you for asking that question.
Thank you. Thank you for that and lifting up the fact that, yes, there have been a lot of people that go uncelebrated because they're not a part of an initiative, a program, or an organization, but they just believe in their hearts. I also would be remiss if I didn't lift up Rick and Martha O'Million, who I also reached out to be a part of the panel. Their daughter was murdered on Western campus by her boyfriend, who then turned a gun on himself. And so, and killed himself. I don't want gun violence, period, is wrong. And I want to lift up that even though it's not talked about, when we talk about gun violence, oftentimes in our community, it tends to lean toward a certain way, even without it being said. However, talking to attorney Jessica Glenn, I found out that it's a ridiculous amount of time. I believe it's like every 2 minutes a woman is killed by someone who claims to love her by a handgun. That's just in America, and in Kalamazoo, we do have cases and instances of handguns involving domestic violence, including Shaquita Lewis, who was killed by her significant other. And Gabby, I want to bring you into the conversation, because when we talk about some of the things that Deputy Boysen lifted up, which is like the influx, the numbers, the data, the just raw numbers in your face, and then we hear Vice Mayor Patrice saying a different data that would definitely fuel some of that stuff. And then hearing the different people, whether it's Miss Melody Coleman or Rick and Martha O'Million, or just so many different people. There's hurt, layers of hurt, complex trauma. I'm proud to know you and know that there is a Black and Brown initiative geared toward a deeper layer of healing. I would ask that you speak on that, but also before speaking on that, or however you choose to do it, just hearing that hurt in the community, if that's not talked about, or it's not even a concern oftentimes, one can only imagine where that goes. And so I just want to bring you in that conversation, as far as not to just talk about it, but ways that we can actually have some actionable steps as well. I hope that's not too loaded. But there we go.
Thanks, Ed. Well, first, I want to preface what I'm going to say with I'm not a mental health professional. So this is all just based on my experiences personally, but then also like working with the Black and Brown Therapy Collective and then other nonprofits. I've been at Griffin Place on the crisis line, and I've been at the YWCA answering that line, and also at the shelter. So this is all based on like my experience, but what you say about that hurt not being processed and like wondering where that goes, I think that's a really great question. I've encountered situations with gun violence when I was a restorative justice facilitator. Like after the Parkland shooting in Florida, I was at a middle school, and I brought that up to the principals, and I talked about, like we need to have some circles at the very least so that the kids can process their feelings about the situation, because like you said, Ed, there's ripples. Even if we don't acknowledge them, there are always ripples and everyone's affected. And so that week, and then the next week after the Parkland shooting, it wasn't public, but like there was a lot of activity where a lot of kids were calling in like fake threats. And I think that was one way that they were processing it, because they weren't given other opportunities to process it. They were just expected to continue going to class and learning, the curriculum. And I think about, well, personally, I don't know what the root cause is here in Kalamazoo specifically for the increase in gun violence. Growing up, a lot of my cousins, I think most of my cousins, I could say, were in gangs in California. I'm from California, and I don't think that's like the mechanism here in Kalamazoo. And also, when I was growing up, a lot of it was knives, stabbings. It wasn't guns. So it seems like something else is going on. I wonder. Officer or Chief or Deputy Chief Boyson mentioned. That we need to do better as a city. Even though like across the US, gun violence is increasing, we're kind of becoming desensitized to all these mass shootings. Like when we hear about one, I don't think we talk about it for a very long time, or like compared to how it used to be. So it seems like generally it's increasing. So it kind of seems like maybe that has something to do, access to guns is a big part, because like we talk about attitude, and we talk about like people like escalating and then escalating, and when you have a gun, then that escalates the whole thing, and it can lead to death. So I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I think the role of the Black and Brown Therapy Collective, we really come in at the very end of all of this, like when the harm has been caused. And so I'm glad that we're here to work on that like deeper unpacking of the trauma for each person individually. But I think because we have such a big problem, it seems like like other people have said so far, it seems like we need to work on a bigger conversation. Like Vice Mayor Griffin was saying that there's already been boots on the ground for many years where people are working on this. And I think maybe supporting those people and like funding those people would be really helpful. And then I think what Michael's been doing with like actual conversations with people face to face, like it seems like that's really successful. So in terms of like how I feel personally about like being in Kalamazoo, when these sorts of things, when gun violence, when people harm each other through violence with a gun, I wouldn't say I feel ashamed, but I think I just feel like a deep sadness. And I don't expect people to tell me their specific trauma when they talk to me about therapy, because that's not my role. I'm just there to connect them with therapists. But occasionally people will tell me about it, and it's like this like it's this like large wound that isn't healing. And so like I said, I'm glad that the Black and Brown Therapy Collective exists, But it seems like you say, all of this pain is just like permeating and it's not going anywhere, and people are expressing it in a lot of different ways. And I think when you have all of this pain and when you have a lot of desperation, and I think there are a lot of people in desperate situations in Kalamazoo, and when you have all of this desperation, you feel like you don't have any other option to whatever the problem is that you're looking at, and then you feel like the violence is a solution to that problem at that moment. Then that's one way of expressing that hurt. But then also, like, think about like the idea of kicking the dog. Like, I think when you're not dealing with your own hurt, then you go and hurt somebody who's weaker than you, or just you just lash out. In the intake form for the crisis line, when people call, one question is, are you feeling suicidal? And then another question, it deals with if the person's feeling homicidal. So I think they're two sides of the same coin. So like you mentioned, that hurt, I think it expresses itself in hurting others, but also hurting yourself. So I'm sorry for rambling. Hopefully that kind of answered your question. I kind of went off all over the place. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you. You did not ramble or go all over the place. Honestly, you colored very well within the lines of something so colorful and chaotic, so to speak. You hit a lot of interesting points. Before passing it over to my brother, Michael Wilder, I'm going to say what you just lifted up. Once upon a time, me, inner city, poor city, my father killed. I learned a lot of what I learned from older guys who were, for lack of better words, gang related. My mother battled with addiction. Yeah, I would have. Yeah, I carried a gun. And if somebody killed somebody that I loved, then the first thing that I would have thought of in response is to kill one of them, or at least return something. And that's a whole different mind state. And when you feel unloved, as some of the things Vice Mayor Patrice lifted up, when you feel like the city is how it is and they don't love you, and the teachers teaching you about Christopher Columbus and some other things that you know not true and they know not true, you start questioning things. And by the time you hit that teenage age where you feel like you figured out everything, and you also feel unprotected, unsafe, and unloved, yeah, you will shoot somebody in a heartbeat. And if you're told not to cry, or that is not manly to cry, or you're being soft, then how do you replace those tears? What are those tears replaced with? Now, I'm gonna pass it over to my brother Michael Wilder, because I know, not only do I know he's lived that same type of life from conversations we've had, but in just talking with some of the young men we've talked to when we've worked together on different things, we know the stories that we hear even now sounds very similar to when we were out there. So just, brother Michael Wilder, just hearing about all of that. So now you got a combination of both. You got that community piece that we initially talked about, and then what Gabby just lifted up for how do we respond to hurt when we were out there, and how are these young men responding to the hurt? And not just young men, just gun violence, period.
I'm gonna tell you. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Can y'all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yesterday I was having a conversation with a police officer. Wow, they're doing a high-speed chase. I was having a conversation with a police officer, and he was telling me about a young man that got killed last year. I think his name was Trevante. And he said for about 7 or 8 months before Trevante got killed, he was carrying a gun. And this police officer was trying to catch him with the gun. Now, he had license to carry, but he was carrying it in a way where it was illegal. So the police officer was pulling up on him, and he would separate the gun and, get it in his legal fashion. Police officer was telling him, man, I'm going to catch you wrong with that gun. I'm telling you, you're going to keep on. I'm going to catch you with that gun. So he was trying his best to catch him with the gun. And then he got the call of the shooting over on, not Woodbury, but Princeton, I think. Yeah. And so when he got over there, he was one of the first responders. And he found that young man dead. And he looked on the ground and he saw the gun that he always was trying to catch this young man with. This police officer told me this story yesterday. And it's sad watching this gun violence, the toll that it takes on all sides of the genre. You got the community, you got the victims, and you got the police department. I have a police officer say, if he been a police officer here for 17 years, and he known a young man since he was 12 years old, and that young man is 21 years old now, and he done arrested that young man before, a couple of his officers done arrested that young man. He know that young man is into violence, and then he gets a call, and that young man is dead. No one considers a police officer's feelings when he looked down and see a young man that he done raised in the community since he was 12, and now he's 21 years old and he's dead. Or let's flip it around. There's someone dead, but this police officer has to go arrest this young man and charge him with murder that he's raised since he was 12 years old. So you have some police officers who feel like they'd rather catch a young man with a gun and give them a 3 to 5 prison sentence. They look at it as they're saving that young man's life, because maybe he'll go through the 3 years for the gun and get out and realize he don't want to be in prison forever. But if his first trip is a murder, now he's gone for life, it's too late. Or if he's the one laying there dead, it's too late. Yet in our community, when there's gun violence, no one tells. So you have a person that's running around here shooting people in our community, and then nobody's telling on that person. So he's getting more and more emboldened. He got 3 actual victims that he shot, and all 3 victims have not told. And it used to be that you're not going to tell because you're going to retaliate. But no, everybody is not killers, and everybody is not retaliators. So they are getting shot and not telling, not because they're going to retaliate, but because they don't want to be known as a snitch. So you can shoot me square in the chest and kill me, but God spares my life and I live. The doctor saved my life. I live, and I'm not supposed to tell on the shooter. Like it's so much, so many layers that we have to work on as a community, as a people, when it comes to this gun violence. There's no cookie cutter way we're going to come up with a solution to this gun violence. But I think we have to attack the ideology of guns. And one more thing, and this may seem like it's not attached, but to me it is. So when we were slaves for 400 years, we only been free for 150 years. That's 250 years of trauma still on us. And when we were slaves, if 2 slaves got into a fight on the plantation and one slave killed another slave, that other slave was not punished. He was not punished. He might got whipped for killing master's good slave, but he didn't go to prison. For 400 years, we killed each other and was not punished for it. And that's still on us to this day. And that's why we as a people can take a fully automatic weapon and point it at another man and gun him down, and that man have not did nothing to his mama or his daughter or his sister or nothing. He can just easily take a gun and point it at one another and gun each other down, because we still have that "I'll kill you" mentality. So, you know what I'm saying? Where do we go from that? How do we attack
Okay.
that from so many different layers? You know what I'm saying? One thing for sure, I believe we have to learn as the city of Kalamazoo, learn how to love our shooters. Teach our shooters that they better than that they worth more than a gun, they worth more than a police report, they worth more than a life sentence in prison. We gotta teach our shooters. Find them, get on the ground and find them. Ask your nephew who his friends is that's a shooter. Ask your little son who his friends is a shooter. Find out who the shooters are.
Hold on, brother Michael. Hold on. Because before you go too far, I want to make sure I let everybody know that's watching. Gun violence is not a black thing. I want to make sure I lift that up. Gun violence is not a black thing. It is not specific to just black people. As a matter of fact, some of the biggest mass shooters in American history have been white, and they did not experience the trauma of slavery. Also, slavery still exists, so says the 13th Amendment. I want to make sure I'm being clear with anybody watching that we definitely in the black culture have a problem with violence as a whole and how it's portrayed as being cool and it's toxic. But it is definitely not specific to just black people. Definitely not. But I have a question though, because we're speaking about community, and before I go over to the agenda and ask Deputy Boysen, Deputy Chief Boysen, Brother Michael Wilder, when the officer said that he was trying to catch the young man with the gun, what did he tell you what his intentions were? If he caught him with the gun illegally, what was it? I don't want to insinuate. I'm hoping that it was to educate him, and perhaps tell him, hey, you know, I could have taken you to jail for this particular thing, but instead I would like to educate you, since you are legal, that this is the proper way. And I would also like to ask you, why are you carrying your gun like this? Because when I carried a gun, no one asked me why I carried a gun. No one knew that I felt unsafe and that in my high school you could have been killed. So I was just curious, and I didn't want to shift that over to Deputy Chief Boysen because he was not the one. Did the officer tell you what his intentions were?
Yeah, well, he didn't tell me
the young man.
He didn't explain it like that. He said that he would pull up on him and he would see dude throw the gun in the trunk to I guess that's something had to do with it. And so he would tell him because he knew he was into his name was mentioned in violence in the street. So I guess he just wanted to take the gun from him, you know. And he said he pulled up on him a couple of times and told him, I'm gonna catch you with that gun. I'm gonna get you, you know. He feel like he wished he would have caught him with the gun, because if he would have caught him with the gun, he could at least taken it from him, or at least locked him up, or he would still be alive if he would have caught him with that gun, because he kept blue rubber bands on the handle of the gun. And that's the first thing he noticed when he got to the scene, is the gun with the blue rubber bands on it. And he said, that's that gun. If I would have just caught him with that gun, he'd be alive. So that was his point to me, that telling me that he felt like if he'd have caught the young man with the gun, he'd still be alive. So, you know, I don't know exactly what,
I get it.
And Ed, if I can touch on that, I think, and I don't know who the officer was or what the story was, but this kind of goes to our philosophy at public safety is we know that there's a lot of people in our community that carry guns. And unfortunately, the way gun violence works is the more gun violence you have, the more people think they need to carry a gun to protect themselves. So the more guns that are out there, and the more guns that are out there, the more propensity we have to have a bad encounter with someone with a gun. So it's a really bad situation. But we know that there are a lot of people with guns, but there are very few number of people in our community driving the majority of our gun violence. That's where our strategic intervention comes in, where we as a collective with our community partners, with street outreach team where we try to do interventions with those people who we know are at risk, because today's shooters are tomorrow's victims and vice versa. They're all the same. So one day you're a shooter, the next day you're a victim. And so we try to do interventions, direct communications with those most at risk for becoming victims or suspects in gun violence, to get them to put the guns down. And hopefully they hook up with our street outreach workers and our social service team to go in another direction, to get the help they need to get back on their feet, to get a job, to do something else other than being in the streets with a gun. But we know, after doing this strategy since 2016, we know that there are people that won't listen to that message, that won't want to take the help, and for whatever reason continue to terrorize our community with a gun. That's when law enforcement comes in, and we have to address those individuals and remove them from the streets to protect the community, one, and two, to protect them from themselves before they become the next homicide victim or going to prison for life, like Michael said. So, but it's not random. If this officer is after this individual, it's not just because he was carrying a gun. The officer probably knew he was a shooter. And those are the ones that we need to focus on. And again, maybe if they sit down for a little time, whether they get a little time in a colony, so that's better than being dead or killing someone. And hopefully, as our community partners and our outreach continues to grow, and we get more people in the front end, because by the time we respond to a shooting as a police department, it's too late. It's too late. We got a victim and we got a suspect. We need to get ahead and break those chain of events before it gets to that shooting. And that's where I think, and hopefully Mike will touch on some of the work that's going on with outreach, because I think that is really the key to reducing gun violence, is that community moral outrage, saying we're not going to stand for this, and we stand together to stop gun violence, and to try to do the interventions and talk to these young men, not public safety, but the community, before it gets to that shooting. And then I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. I'm glad you lifted that up. And before, I want to say that the county incarceration is a greater alternative to death, but absolutely not the only alternative. And that opens the door for me to go into, I want to lift up Dr. Sandra Medellin, who works at Bronson, who's a trauma surgeon, moved here from Delaware, and just got hands-on. So recently, myself, Vice Mayor Patrice Griffin, Vice Chair, County Commissioner Tammy Ray, just was trained for the Stop the Bleed training, which teaches community members how to not only stop the bleeding of a gunshot wound or any other injury, but also how to work with law enforcement when they come to the scene and be able to explain, we were here at 3 o'clock. This is what this is, and this speaks to Brother Michael Wilder with the, there is, unfortunately, and could you please cut the camera on your face, Michael Wilder, please? They put it in the chat for you. Thank you. When there is something, a no snitching, and it's shameful because there's so many, whether it's, you could be famous. You could be Tupac Shakur, an icon, and nobody will say a word. You could be the Notorious B.I.G. Nobody will say a word. You could be Nipsey Hussle. Nobody will say a word. You could be Jam Master Jay in your own studio. Nobody will say a word. That's culturally something sad. But I want to lift up that when you hear things that's like, we don't have many things in place, but we could put you in jail, and that's better than being dead. And if you have a real beef, at least where I grew up, you could also be killed when you're incarcerated. It just won't be by a gun. And so we want to speak to trying to come together collectively. So I wanted to lift up the Bronson. Respectfully, we have Isaac Anti-Gun Violence Task Force, which does a lot of outreach that oftentimes does not go is not credited, is not for the media necessarily, or things like that. I may post it on my Facebook, things like that, but it's just more for the outreach, to Stop the Bleed campaign. The Block Clubs initiative came strictly out of trying to figure out ways that us as a community can say enough is enough, not just from the gun violence, but also with the trash. But there has to be a way. There has to be a way that we all. That's one of the reasons for this conversation in the part two. Like I said, this was very specific that all of us be on the call so that we all can learn what are some of the things that you're doing. Well, we're doing this and we have this plan, or we just did this a week ago, because there's different ways of outreach. And I've watched myself personally recently 2 older guys take guns from younger guys, just in a OG type of way. Like, man, why do you have that? Man, put that in the backseat of my car, man, hurry up. And I had to tell him, like, you got to be careful, because you'll catch a case. Like, just transporting the gun, that's the scary part. And Deputy Boysen, I kind of want to lift that up to you. What are some of the ways that we have people that do outreach that's not necessarily with KDPS right now, and then they're just now getting to know Yefencio and Brother Michael Wilder? We're trying to get a lot of things going, but I witnessed this on the north side, no names. About a week and a half ago, an older guy was like, man, if you don't give me that and put that in my car. But I had to warn him that, man, you not totally legit, and he could have gotten in trouble for that. How would that have worked with him explaining it wouldn't have worked if he got caught with it. Like, man, I just took this from somebody, but how do we, like, I wish there was a way that it could be a sign-up sheet or something that's like, if you want to be a part of this, make sure your name is documented so we know what you're doing. Like, how do we intervene? Because the law enforcement might not have been able to get the guy to put the gun down that Michael Wilder talked about, but maybe, just maybe, somebody, some of these parents, definitely, some of these parents can come together and say, what are y'all actually beefing about? How can we solve it? If it's about money, let's figure that out. If it's about something else, like, how do we keep them from jail if we can, by intervening, and how can we all work more together?
Yeah, thanks. That is exactly the whole point of this is, and I tell my law enforcement team all the time, because I'm in charge of, one of the things I'm in charge of is investigations. And I tell them all the time is, we will never know how many shootings the outreach workers and community partners prevent, right? Every day, every week, something happens, like you talked about, Ed, where a family member, an influential person, talks someone down from doing something they shouldn't do every day. And I know that it's happened at Urban Alliance, where we've had guys come in that were beefing it, and not we, the outreach team, got guys come in on opposite sides of a beef and got them to squash it and shake hands and be done with it. That is how we solve shootings in Kalamazoo. It can't be arrest. Like you said, when you arrest someone, it's a trauma to the person you arrested, the family. It's not the answer. It's a tool that we have to have, because, just in case, people don't want the other alternatives, but it's not the answer. And we should say, as a community, every time we have a young man shot, every time we have a young man killed, someone in that person's circle needs to look around and say, what did we do wrong? How did we let this happen? Because that's what it's going to take. And we are all for, if the community, that's the key. So everybody needs to be an outreach worker, right? I can't have 6 guys doing it for the whole city of Kalamazoo. It's got to be the entire city. Every family member is an outreach worker, right? And it might not be your son or your nephew that's out there, but maybe the grandma one that's involved, and you can talk to them, or an influential person. And that's where, the effort of getting the moms involved. It's too bad Miss Coleman couldn't be here, because that's what's going to take, is these family members to do that outreach. That is the answer. And I think we're picking up a lot of steam with that, with what we're doing with the interventions. because that community moral voice has to be part of the majority of the solution, not a part of it, the majority of the solution. We're a small part of public safety. The majority should come from the community end of it, and that's why I appreciate everyone's work here.
You just hit a real key point. I was like, wow, yeah. Somebody in the group, somebody should say this is wrong. And so I'm before passing it over to Vice Mayor Patrice Griffin to touch on some of the different things that I witnessed you personally doing, but ways that I don't want to say ways that we can ramp it up, but how do we stay, how do we stay moving forward? And so what I want to lift up is something sad that I saw, that I just met 2 officers out doing outreach on about the public nuisance laws. And Officer Alex Marshall and Officer Catrice Lockett. Is it Catrice? Yeah, it's Catrice. Yeah, Lockett. And so I just introduced myself, talked to them, and one of the questions they asked was, what can we do about this gun violence? And I was like, wow, okay. So I told them a couple of things, and like Brother Michael Wilder said, it's not a cookie cutter response or anything like that. So I couldn't give them anything that's just like, hey, go do this and this will do it. But one of the things that I lifted up was something that Deputy Chief Boysen showed me a while ago. And it's what made me really be diligent about the block clubs and really get out here and try to do a lot of outreach with talking with people. And it was a shooting on Florence, and the people kept partying. The people kept like it was nothing, and paramedics couldn't drive through. And that was hands down what I shared with the officers, one of the most shameful displays that I saw over human life. There's an outcry if I'm beaten by the police in front of the store and it's caught on camera, then we'll tear the store up. We'll tear the city up. But if I'm shot at a get together, then everybody just keeps partying and doesn't let law enforcement come through and do their job. Paramedics had to take the stretcher off the back of the truck and run through the crowd of people who would not even hardly move. That's a lack of caring about human life. And that speaks to a whole nother, I said, oh, we got some healing to do out here. That's not just gun violence. That's, you don't care about where you live. You don't care who lives next to you. Yeah, so I forgive me for just going down that road, but that still weighs heavy on my heart. From like, I said, okay, I got a lot of work to do to see that. I wish, I asked that day, I asked Deputy Chief Boysen that day, I said, I wish it was a way we could show this like at Kalamazoo 10, and like, don't let people know that they're watching this and it just comes on before a movie and it's like shock value. And I think in my mind, in my heart, it feels like that'll wake people up. But then again, I've seen things on the streets that were people witnessed, and like Michael Wilder said, people won't say a word. And I can name 4 unsolved murders in the city, and at least 2 of them, I know people that say, well, I was there, but that ain't got nothing to do with me. And it's like, wow, like, how can you say that? And my father was killed. And I don't think it's cool that I had to put together a jigsaw puzzle just to figure out why he was killed. That's trauma. And that I'm still healing from. I'm talking too much. I'm sorry. Vice Mayor Patrice, that trauma, that lack of concern over human life, and I get the conditions, like it's so many different things that contribute to But as a former knucklehead, I know for a fact we can't just use that as an excuse for so long. Well, you know, I didn't have this and I didn't have this and I didn't have this. Like it does feel a certain when you're unsafe. But I also didn't carry a gun the same way I did in Gary and Kalamazoo. So I knew a difference of where I was at. And I'm not saying that to suggest that I'm a higher level of thinking than anybody who carries a gun. So I shouldn't have said that. I chose not to move the same way that I felt like I had to. But what do you think that is as far as in the city that we can be doing more of or coming together more on? If that makes sense.
Thank you for asking that question. Before I answer that, I have to lean in just a little bit. I know one of the touchstones is to speak your truth, right? And so, Michael Wilder, when you were speaking at first, you were speaking your truth, and I uphold that. But in speaking your truth, you listed a specific name of an individual who was a victim of gun violence here in this community, Trevante Brown McFerrin. And it made me feel a little uncomfortable because this is someone's son, someone's nephew, someone's father, and he's not here, and nor is there anyone here to speak on his behalf. And so I can't answer that question without at least saying that I don't feel like it's appropriate to list this name specifically or anyone else's name specifically without that other side. So in the future, if we do speak our truths, be mindful, especially as we're talking about trauma and the ways that people feel as we're even talking about this sort of thing. So I wanted to lean in and speak my truth on that while acknowledging that you're speaking yours. So to answer your question, what do I think things that we should gather together more on? I lean heavily on systems change, and I lean heavily on being proactive, right? And I realize that when you're in a situation where things are happening, you definitely have to react to it. But specifically, I think gathering more on the things that contribute to what makes a person want to turn to violence in the first place as a solution, as a means. What's making them want to pick up a gun? And like I said in the beginning, we have enough data, we have enough statistics in our community specifically to know where people are underserved and under-resourced. And so if we are not being top heavy in that space, but then being heavy on the after effects or the enforcement or that, then we're losing. And then in 10 years, we're going to keep having these conversations because the children of the parents who have been taken from their lives due to violence, and as we're speaking in this conversation, gun violence, they're going to grow up. And what about that trauma? And what of that? So the cycle just continues. So I think we just need to gather intentionally, specifically about what we can do to prevent that, all while all of the things that we're doing when things happen. And so, yeah, I think we just have to do more of that. And through conversations like these, through the Black and Brown Initiative, through the people that are working on GVI and other initiatives that, are all trying to do what we can do to put a hand in stopping this, because we don't need to lose anybody else, because it's so final, it's so permanent. There is no going back. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I love that you used the word gather, because as you were explaining different things, I had to learn, like, oftentimes community, like I watch you go through it, I watch KDPS go through it, and that is the people fussing at the wrong people sometimes. And it's like, well, we don't have anything for the kids to do. And it's like, okay, law enforcement does not build clubs and skating rinks and things like that. However, they will lock you up. So what can we do as a community to either let them know that we're working as a way to, like, hey, you don't have to get these group of people because we're working on a skating rink, or we have this parking lot on Saturday where they get out here and play kickball, or we do this. If we don't do that, then it's like their hands are tied a lot of times. And this has come from, and I can say this because there's a mutual respect. Deputy Boysen knows, Deputy Chief Boysen knows, we've had some bumping head conversations where I've been one of the people on the other side, like, well, what do you want them to do? And he was like, well, you tell me. Like, that's not for me to fill out and that takes a level of growth to get to. And then you go to your city officials and you find out you're talking to the wrong people in the city officials. And then it all goes back to, wow, this is on us. This is on us as a community, as a whole. So I love that you said gather, Patrice, with us as a community, because that's what makes up community. So that speaks to exactly what Deputy Chief Boysen was saying was, the tool that they have, and there's different tools. They can put out fires, they can help resuscitate you, and they can also put them cuffs on you. So those are the different tools, and we have to know the different workings of those tools. We've tossed around an acronym this whole time. We said GVI. Michael Wilder, can you explain what GVI is to the people that's watching? What is GVI?
GVI is an acronym for Group Violence Intervention. We don't like to be referred to as a organization. We're more like a situation, and we just it's a program geared at coming up with ways to reduce gun violence and group violence in different cities, and it has different blueprints for different areas. Like, it used to be referred to as GVI, Gang Violence Intervention, but then we realized all groups are not gangs, but all gangs are groups. So here in Kalamazoo, you don't have a lot of gangs, but you do have a lot of groups. So that's why we're Group Violence Intervention here in Kalamazoo. But if you go to California or Miami, they might refer to theirs as Gang Violence Intervention. So here in Kalamazoo, we Group Violence Intervention, and it's just trying to study the groups, find out who are the higher violent people, try to get them out of the way. But that's not the overall thing. The overall thing is to just simply reduce gun violence in the city of Kalamazoo. That's what GVI is for the city of Kalamazoo. We're trying to reduce gun violence.
And one of the things that I know is the Peace Smoke. You've done outreach, community outreach and things like that. And then last summer, we all got together, Isaac, GVI, Ms. Gwendolyn Hooker with Hope through Navigation, Hope for Navigation, Hope through Navigation. Forgive me, Ms. Gwendolyn. Vice Mayor, Patrice. So we had the city, we had the radio 95.5. We all got out there and just hit different blocks on the north side. And you continue to do things like that, like the Peace Smoke. Talk a little bit about that, like the different outreach and the different things that GVI has done and continues to do. And then Patrice, I also want I'm sorry, Michael. I also want you to, because you lead one of the block clubs, so I wanted you to speak to some of the outreach things as well. But Michael Wilder, yeah, the Peace Smoke and the things.
One of the things that we do as GVI is we kind of aim at known shooters in the community. You know, the community knows who their shooters are. And if you are able to communicate with the right people, you might be able to slide up next to an actual homicide suspect. And hey babies, and he may be able, he might be ready to shoot some more people. But if we can get to him and let him know that, hey man, if you can give me that gun, get that gun out of his hand, you worth more than this, man. You know what I'm saying? You don't got to throw your life away. You don't have to end up in somebody's prison. You already done shot a couple of people and got away with it. Come on, man. Come over here with us, man. Let's help you. Let us get you out of this trouble. Let's get you in a different lane. Now, true enough, all of them won't listen to us. Some of them are going to kill and some of them are going to die. But what if some of them listen to us? Well, the some of them listen to us have been listening to my team. So at my building at Urban Alliance on the south side of Kalamazoo, I have known shooters in the building. I have some convicted shooters. I have some convicted murderers. I have some acquitted murderers. I have some suspected murderers. I got some suspected shooters, all who have decided that they want to be a part of the solution. They've been part of the problem for a long time. They have reputations with the police, and now they are coming to GVI. They at my building. They saying, listen, if y'all want to do this, then y'all need to talk to this person. Y'all need to talk to that person. If y'all want to do this, y'all got to go do this. Y'all got to do that. So using the shooters and the community of the people who know the shooters, GVI is able to reach a certain audience that don't talk to normal people, definitely don't talk to police. They got their own culture. Well, I got people that's reaching them and talking to them, and they sending me messages back, and they saying stuff like, no, we ain't messing with GVI, them the police. Those people, the police, they doing this, they doing that. And then you got some people that saying, hey man, I'm interested in that. So you know, what can we do to be a part of GVI? What can we? And I say, come on down to the building. So with Peace Smoke, we were doing those events at homicide sites. Last year, if somebody get killed, we'd go to that site and I do a Peace Smoke event, which is barbecue grills, sparkles, and candles. The ideology is Peace Smoke beats gun smoke. If the guys are coming to shoot up the block and then they smell the barbecue grills and see the kids and the women out having a good time, they'll leave and say, we'll be back next time. So we don't worry about the fact that they're gonna come back, but the fact that the Peace Smoke negated the gun smoke. So this year we decided to be more proactive. We don't want to wait till homicides to do it. So we're doing Peace Smoke events repeatedly on east side of the city throughout the summer. And our first one is this Saturday at Urban Alliance on Stockbridge and Race, or Stockbridge and Mills. And we're gonna give away 100 rib tip dinners, 100 hot dogs, 100 hamburgers, and just feed the community and open the mic up so people can come and speak their pain and you know, just talk with one another. And we have women who've lost children to gun violence. We putting those things together. So GVI is a spider web into a whole bunch of different compartments when it comes to reducing the gun violence.
How can we come together as a community to where okay, so it's all right, so I'm trying to keep it so how do we come together as community to where GVI is not the end all say all, so to speak, for the spider web, as you just put it, because Isaac has a whole anti-gun violence task force and outreach, and I've invited GVI several times, which is why we did the thing in the summer. It's not reciprocated as much as right now, as far as being invited to the different Peace Smoke things, but how can we come together so we're all collectively, it's not a, like, hurt is hurt. And when it hurts, when the ripples go through, you know, I've worked with GVI. I have a respect for you and all of the work that you do. But oftentimes our approaches have been different, but the same. The goal is the same. And we've had multiple talks. You know, I came to the Peace and War room, which was dope. For all of you who don't know what he was talking about, they have a room at Urban Alliance, which is the ambiance, the whole mood is very inviting for anybody that's if you're fresh out of that life or still in that life, you wouldn't. This is not the same as meeting in like a stuffy office or even meeting at the police station. It's very relaxed and comfortable. But how do we come together? Like, everybody doesn't know how to check in with GVI, or we are doing our due diligence with KDPS. Myself and Chief Vernon Coakley just had a talk last week, even after my public rants. There's still a mutual respect. He knows that I'm not attacking him as a human being or as a Black man or as a person, but rather the institution, certain institutional things that I necessarily don't agree with. But when it comes to us fighting together on community issues such as violence, the public nuisance parties, when we got families saying, what can we do? People in my yard till 7 a.m. Like, come on. If we don't all work together, these things lead to and have led to shootings when we have things like that. So if we're not all doing our due diligence, then to me, it's like looking the other way. And so what I don't want to get into, and I'm not putting this all on you, Brother Michael Wilder, by any means, but what I want to get away from is two things. One, in community, people saying, oh, they're taking care of that. Ed, that's kind of like what y'all do. Or Michael Wilder, that's what GVI does. Like, so erasing the title, so to speak, and be more inviting with people like Chief Boysen said, everybody should be outreach. Like, and you should. And that second part is, the minute we can start not convincing, but really getting people to acknowledge this is your community, unless you don't want it to be. And then maybe you have a plan to move. But if you plan on living here, this affects you, because they'll shoot down your block. We had to dive on our floor. We were just sitting there watching TV. And I mean, literally dive and hit the floor. You don't never know when it'll happen. Driving in traffic, car behind us lit up a house. Or was it the car in front of us, Patrice, or the car I forget. The car in back of us lit up a house, and it's like broad daylight. How do we tell people this is not just the police job? Because you hear that a lot. Well, the police not over here doing their job or not. It's not just, okay, Brother Michael Wilder. Michael Wilder said he has to leave. We will stay in contact though. It's not just GVI's plight. It's not the city's. It's all of ours. And Gabby, I know you said that it's like the last part, but one of the things is, how can we make it a collective even on that part? Like, when there are outreach events, how do we all have those conversations? And that's pretty much all. But Patrice, I'm kicking it over to you. Vice Mayor Patrice, I'm kicking over to you first. How can we start to have the conversation of this, all of us, or none of us?
Well, I think we're doing it now. I think the people who have been doing the work are continuing to do the work, and everyone who is feeling compelled now to jump in the ways that they can jump in are doing that. And so sometimes you have people boots on the ground who are actually planning the events. You have people that are going to be at the events, and sometimes your part is sharing the flyer or sharing the Facebook post or telling your friends or talking to the community. I think some people feel like if they don't show up in a certain way, then they're not showing up, and that's not true, because we all are part of the outreach, and we all can only give what we can give. But if we give our full selves and all the wonderful gifts that we have, it'll all come together as a whole. And since this is affecting our community, it's going to take our community. And as you said, we can't have the feelings of this isn't our responsibility, or thinking that because what you may see on TV a lot, or what may get promoted a lot, is violence with guns in a certain community, and that's not true. There is no I'm going to move away from here and move away from this, because where are you going? Where is this not taking place? And so it's going to take for that to continue to happen. People also have to feel safe when they are brought into spaces, right? Because one of the things that has happened is that there have been sessions, there are things that have taken place where people share their stories, and then that's it. And so one of the other ways that is happening currently is the block clubs. And like you said, we have a block club on our street. And so our community, our neighbors have been very, very interested in learning how to advocate. And that's one of the reasons and one of the parts of the block clubs, advocating for yourself. And so I think that's a great way. And I'm sorry, I know I'm just rambling a little bit, but thank you.
Vice Mayor, if I could touch on that, and what Ed was saying is you're right. How can we all work together? And what we said right at the beginning of this, if you remember, is gun violence is a big problem, right? You have domestic violence, you have group violence, you have other issues on top of that with poverty and inequities in the system. You have a lot of layers here, right? Well, one group isn't going to be able to fix that. It's going to take each group working in their own special area of focus and all coming together at some point, but you each do your own thing to attack this giant problem. So I think when you talk about TRHT and Isaac and GVI and the block clubs, they all play a role in addressing one of those things that we're talking about. And so I think because we have different goals doesn't mean, or different parts of the problem we're working on, doesn't mean we're not aligned with what we're trying to do, which is reduce overall violence and make our community better. So I think we have, in fact, there's a lot of people that are on THT and Isaac that are on GVI and that are in part of the, other groups, the Gun Violence Task Force, and all those things. We're just working on things from a different angle, but all those angles need to be addressed. And so I think there's just a lot of great stuff going on with these different groups. And I think our goals are really, really pretty closely aligned, which is trying to reduce violence. So, and there's some things that the Gun Violence Task Force can do that GVI can partner with, or the block clubs can partner with, and vice versa. And we just have to be more intentional about that, I think.
I love that you said that with the intentional part. And I have to shout out Assistant Chief Matt Elziger and Officer Workema, who come to the Isaac Anti-Gun Violence Task Force meetings. And if we can just spread, because we're just in different sections sometimes. So I have a great relationship with you and Chief Coakley, and other people that do outreach may not. And we need to bring them in so they can introduce themselves and say, well, yeah, okay, I want to do the work, and just keep it going like that. And then also, again, Dr. Sandra Medellin from Bronson just introducing the Stop the Bleed campaign here. And they just talked about Stop the Bleed campaign on 60 Minutes Sunday, because it's a national campaign, but now we have it here in Kalamazoo. So just another form of coming together. And Gabby, again, we have TRutH, Racial Healing and Transformation here in Kalamazoo. And so we come up with different ways of how can we transform some of the things that's been going on for so long. So we've heard the atrocities that are the aftermath or the outcome to gun violence, the homicides. And I'm I'm not putting you on the spot and asking that you have a miracle answer of what can we do to avoid that. But what I am saying is, what are some of the ways that you think that we can be more in community with one another, or more intentional, like Deputy Chief Poison just said?
Thanks, Ed. I was listening to Deputy Chief Boyson, and he listed a few different factors that lead to gun violence. And some of those were, I mean, like, you listed them because they're on the top of your mind. But I think some of those are a lot bigger than some of the other ones. And I think some really huge ones, systemic ones, are systemic inequity and racism. And I think that, Michael mentioned this earlier. He mentioned slavery, and I think it's relevant, not for the same reasons that he was describing, but I think it's relevant because after hundreds of years, you end up with collective wealth for white people and poverty for Black people and brown people. And that's not like totally true across the board. There are a lot of poor white people. There are a lot of middle class and wealthy Black people, but like generally as a nation, that's the case. And so listening to all of this conversation, I think, I'm really happy that there are boots on the ground. People are working on all of these different initiatives. And when you told the story about those two men who took the guns away from the young guys, that's really like heartening for me to hear, because I grew up in the undocumented community. So everything, I have documents, but everything that we did was under the table. So like there wasn't any institution involved in anything, any conflict resolution or anything like that, because literally putting your face out there could mean that you'd get deported. So I feel like I understand a little bit about, like working under the table and just taking the guns. I think that those men understood the risk with doing that. Like it's clear, like if I get caught with this gun in my car, it's going to be a problem for me, but that risk was worth taking for them. So I think that, so like I said, that's really heartening for me. Those like when I hear a lot of people say, that people aren't outraged, I don't think that there's any basis for thinking that. I think people are outraged. And I think a lot of people have probably moved beyond outrage into, I don't know if I would say apathy, because I think people care, but I think it's kind of like hopelessness. And so I think that I don't know, I keep hearing like when these sorts of conversations happen, or like there are news stories or that kind of thing, it kind of like, it's like we're individualizing the problem. And in this case, I think we're like, I'm hearing like, I'm kind of hearing people like describing the issue as like certain neighborhoods in Kalamazoo. And so we're just like hyper focused on that. And we're like, what's wrong with these people? Those guys are monsters. They're irredeemable. I'm not saying any of you said this exactly, but I'm just saying like, this is the attitude. But why don't we like turn that over and look and think, like, I live in West Main Hill. Like, why don't we ask ourselves, why aren't there shootings in West Main Hill? It's not because everyone's like a good person in West Main Hill. Like we're not like fundamentally innocent. It's because we're well resourced. And that comes from, like higher paying jobs, and like the sidewalks are nice. Most of the houses are occupied. There's like all of these things. We can park on the street. There's not a sense of fear, a sense that somebody's gonna like come down, bearing down on our backs, or like knocking down our doors. Generally, there's not a big sense of fear. There's a sense of freedom. So I think the culture is completely different. And so like when I think about like the root of this, I think, like I'm really excited about the reparations initiative, because I think like, yeah, you can tell people to like pull themselves up by the bootstraps and deal with the situation and feel outraged. But like, there's a lot of resources that need to come in so that people have that freedom to let out a breath of relief and actually like work in community and get together and work on these issues. So I just wanted to say that. And also, I know I'm kind of ranting, I'm so sorry, but one reason that the Black and Brown Therapy Collective exists is because, like, of course, again, there's like always exceptions, but generally, when a Black or brown person or Indigenous person goes to a therapist who is white, the therapist is more quick to pathologize that person or think, like the way that this Black woman is expressing herself, like immediately reads as anger to me, and she's just talking, so like you're saying, like a Black woman comes in and I'm a white woman therapist and I talk to her and I'm like, oh, hold on, you have an anger problem. What I'm hoping, so I bring that up because the reason that the Black and Brown Therapy Collective, one of the reasons it exists is to avoid that issue. But when I hear, I'm hoping that I'm not really putting him on like the under the light or whatever. But when I heard Michael talking about slavery and like implying that Black people don't have regard for Black life, which like doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sorry, that was like viscerally upsetting for me. That's kind of, it's kind of like he's kind of doing the same thing that white therapists do. So I'm hoping that like on an individual level, Black and brown people are not doing that to each other, like as a starting point, because that's just like gonna derail the entire sense of community. So more practically, more down to earth, back from like my tangent, I'm so sorry. The Black and Brown Therapy Collective, I'm really hoping to get together with GVI and set up some group therapy sessions for survivors of gun violence and then the mothers of people who have been shot or killed through gun violence. And so I'm still working on like getting the logistics together, but that's like something that we really want to push. So on our end, that's like like you all mentioned, there's a lot of these different moving parts and a lot of people working together in the community. Vice Mayor Griffin mentioned that like things are happening. So I'm hoping that this will be something that comes to fruition sooner rather than later. Like I said, I need to find therapists who have the capacity to do this because it is really heavy work. So again, I'm sorry for ranting, but thank you. That's my answer.
You definitely didn't rant. You helped ease some of my tension. This conversation all of these conversations are heavy because we talk about a lot of controversial things regarding our community. And sometimes they become controversial because we have to tell the truth about COVID hitting Black and brown people differently than it did our white counterparts and things like that. We always have to say that true part. And some of the things that you lifted up was just like, yes, 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 yes. I was that person. And the only response was out of school. And like I said, no one ever asked me why I had a gun. And I got my gun back like later on that day. My friend, who's one of my best friends to this day, took it home for me, gave it to his father. His father's now a preacher. And we talk about it now because he didn't know at the time because he was in a different lifestyle. I was 16 years old and I knocked on his front door and asked for my gun back. And he wanted to buy it from me. And I had told him I couldn't sell it. I told him I needed it. And when I said I needed it, he went in the house and he gave it back to me. And this is somebody's father giving a 16. I couldn't imagine giving. However, because I come from that, some of the things you just lifted up, Gabby, I understand what that is. And so that's probably what that father did at that time. He probably just had been there before. And he couldn't re-raise me at that point. So he had two options. He could either say, man, get out of here. And I could have been killed and he probably would have had that on his conscience, or give it back to me. I don't know. But I wasn't one of the ones that was just randomly just shooting and things like that. I just felt unsafe. And oftentimes I think what you lifted up, Gabby, is that if they're in a group and there's just 5 people and we want to get the guns off the street, if we don't know that the 5th one of the 5 just feel unsafe and he's not a shooter, he's not one of the people that's actively, the time is the same. He gets the same amount of time. He gets, you know, this has been a heavy one for me because I don't have any answers. I just know that I grew up without a father as a result of gun violence, and years later, I still carried a gun, so it didn't deter me. In fact, it made me feel like I needed one even more. I myself try to tell anybody that if you have a gun, get it legally. If you feel like you have to carry a gun, do so legally. The Second Amendment allows you that right if you haven't been convicted of a felony. But there's different ways that I've learned to feel safe, and it's not just so easy that we can say, well, move. If that's what your neighborhood is like, then move. Poverty is real. Actually, excuse me, capitalism and racism is real. And so it fuels what they call poverty, which is really capitalism, period. So I found. And so with that, oftentimes people can't just pick up and move. Even if their house was shot up, they have to just patch the windows up, say a prayer, and continue. And this is, I just really appreciate you all taking the time that you did today and that you do often in your respective lives and in your work. This was very intentional to have this conversation with you all, period. And I believe we'll probably have to have a part 3. Because we should continue the conversation. And as it opens up this summer, I'm putting this out there. I'm saying now, let's do something. I talked with Chief Vernon Coakley about this, and I said, let's do something collectively, but let's make it real so the community knows that it's real and that we're here not as like missionaries, like we come to save you because you don't know how to save yourselves, but like just in a supportive way. And I don't know what that all looks like, but I know what it doesn't look like because I know what's been said to me, and that didn't work. But perhaps now, like Deputy Chief Boys, and y'all got to forgive me, I'm dragging at this last part. I'm thinking about so many different things that were said, and so much, like it's weird that we're even having this conversation about like people killing people, and it's like, wow, that's just so much underlying and complex trauma with that. Thank you all for taking the time to speak to this problem that affects us all and affects our community. Thank you for the work that you all have been doing. Thank you for the conversations that you have when nobody's listening and you're just doing it because it's just the right thing to do. So I really just appreciate you all for that. And with that, I want to shout out Shalana Lewis for giving us the opportunity to create something like Truth Talks, and retired Captain Stacy Ledbetter for listening and helping support and helping create. Retired Captain Stacy Ledbetter is actually the co-creator, her and myself, of this discussion panel. And we just wanted to have real conversations and really talk about things that the community can learn more about So community, if you're listening, you have public safety. And if you don't know, this is something that I like to tell people since Kalamazoo has the nation's largest public safety department. And what that is not just law enforcement. So they put out fires. And when I said that earlier, like I meant that, like they put out fires and also can resuscitate somebody if within their training. Not saying that they're doctors or surgeons or anything like that, but public safety is actually something different. And myself and a few other community members, including Vice Mayor Patrice Griffin, went through that citizen training and just learned a lot. There's still a lot of healing that has to happen between community and public safety, but I believe we'll get there as well. And one of the ways that connects us all is like gun violence or like the public nuisance is like to meet at the same time, community and KDPS, and somebody has been shot. That's not opposite sides. That's not you're on this side, we're on this side. That's everybody together, and everybody has been impacted by that. So I'm tripping. I usually do way better on calls like these. And we even had a part one. I don't think I was this heavy on it. I don't know. It's one thing to say it's not a cookie cutter response. I feel the same, but then you find yourself saying, well, what is the response then? What? And that's not ego and just thinking like I have to have an answer, but it's like really wanting to help, really wanting to say that that's not cool. And it's also not cool to feel like one day I'll be shot and killed, which is a feeling that I felt since I was little. And that's not cool to think like that. You know, I want to die of old age, happy, real old and happy. But that is a reality. And so I'm rambling and ranting. So forgive me, y'all. Y'all supposed to be out of here at 5:30. I appreciate your time. Any last words that anybody want to say? I have to say, shouts out to Dr. Charlotte Davis, who's the executive director for Isaac, and everybody that's doing the work. Shouts out to them, but I just wanted to specifically shout out a few people that I know that's doing the work, and also listen to people like myself in ways of saying I think I have an idea, and they have supported it in ways to say, well, and that's why we're here today. Like dope people like Shalana Lewis that says, well, go ahead, and if you think that this works, then I support it, and I think it works too. So those are my last words. Thank you for the people in the community, and thank you all for being a part of the community. And yeah, thank you. Those are my last words. Just thank you. Anybody, you could just go.
Just thanks for the invite, and appreciated the discussion. So everybody have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night as well.
Thanks for inviting me. It was nice talking with all of you and listening.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, my sentiments as well. Thank you.
All right, everyone. You'll get notification for part 3. So peace, and thank you, Emily, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you, Emily, for being behind the scenes, and peace.